Hello everyone, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for a session about accessing and interpreting your employee engagement data. I'm Marissa De La Rosa, a consultant on the employee engagement team in leadership and talent development. I'm joined on the webinar today by Brandon Sullivan, Jennifer Engler, Chelsea Dunkel, and Terry Spillers as well. While you will hear primarily from me, they will be available to help answer questions at the end. Today's webinar is intended as a live demo. Again, you're not expected to follow along in the system. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Employee Engagement website by the end of the week. That website, which we hope you've already visited, is ee.ltd.umn.edu. We hope that you've seen the resources there for navigating this new data portal. Today, while we navigate through the website live, looking at some of the printable guides may be helpful to you. So I'll show you that here quickly. I'm on ee.ltd.umn.edu right now, and there are many guides that we have out here that I'll be referencing today. So some under the quick links here on the right, and then also printable guides section here. Also, if you are reading the How Do I, which we'll look at, yes, How Do I section midway down the page. So lots and lots of resources here that we'll be referencing today. And the second portion of this webinar is going to focus on the new resources for interpreting survey data, facilitating discussions about your data, and taking action. I'll show you all of those resources as we go through the webinar. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A field on the right side to send your questions to us. We'll try to address those questions at the end of the webinar, as well as post the questions and answers on the website. So I wanted to show you the agenda. Since we're going to cover a lot of information related to your employee engagement today, some of it may be familiar to you if you've received reports in the past. However, some of the information is new because we have a new online portal that we're using to access our data this year. We have the ability to access all of the same data that we've had in years past, and we have some new features as well. If you've previously exported your data from the system, feel free to follow along with today's presentation using your own data. Please do not try to export your data now, as it will slow down the system and again prevent us from showing live navigation. So let's do that. Let's take a look at accessing the data portal. You all received your access information in an email, so I'm going to log in for us here. Know that this portal ID right here is very important to actually getting into the site. Here we are, we're logged in, we were at the sign-in page. Just to note that all leaders who have data to view in the portal will have received their access instructions from our vendor, Korn Ferry Hay Group, and that access information was sent on January 29. Please contact Korn Ferry Hay Group if you're unable to log into that portal. You can find their email address on our website, which I'm going to show you here in a bit. Notice that we have 6 different hierarchies in the portal. Faculty and staff receive different versions of the survey, plus direct reports are separated from indirect or roll-up reports as well. So that's why we have all of these different hierarchies. Note that we have faculty direct, which contains faculty that report directly to a particular manager, and faculty all, which includes all faculty, direct and indirect, that roll up to a manager. There's also a faculty special reports hierarchy that contains any custom reports requested by the college or campus. We then have the same structure for staff results as well. There's a staff direct hierarchy, which includes only direct reports to a particular manager. There's staff all, which includes all staff direct and indirect reports that roll up to a manager. And finally, staff special reports, which includes any custom reports requested by a unit, college, or campus. Note, you will only have access to the hierarchies and reports that are applicable for you. Once you log in, this is where you get to select the hierarchy that you'd like to view. If you only have access to one hierarchy, you'll be brought directly to the welcome page. For today's webinar, we're going to look at staff all. Great, so this brings us to the welcome page. Note that the name of the hierarchy that you're in will appear on the top right side of the banner here. The welcome page allows you to link to several different sites. The training resources link here brings you to the website that I referred to earlier that we looked at quickly, ee.ltd.umn.edu. Here you can view short videos and quick guides about this portal and resources for how to interpret your data and take action. We'll look at that more closely later on. The next link, called Employee Engagement Module, links to the 5th module of the Supervisory Development course. The engagement model on the right side of the page here is explained in that module. We'll also talk about the model when we start looking at the data. Further down the page, you'll see the email address here where you can contact the vendor if you're having technical issues with the site. And there's also a Z-link to our employee engagement site on the Human Resources website where you can see some high-level and historical engagement information, as well as upcoming events. And if you ever have employee engagement questions, please send an email to ee2@umn.edu. Please note that our access to the online data portal ends on December 14 of 2018. You'll have the ability to export all of your data from the system, and we'll go over that in detail in a bit. You'll see University of Minnesota system displaying in the top left corner. It always defaults to the highest level of access the user has in that specific hierarchy. So you can see that I have access at the system level. The first menu item that we'll look at is the dashboard. So I've just clicked on dashboard. And while it's processing here, you can go to the dashboard for a quick view of key data, including response rates, the engagement profile, key metrics, and strengths and opportunities. This is a great first place to start when you're navigating in the system. It's showing me high-level data. To see more detailed information, I can click more on any of these widgets. These are the overall results for university staff that we're seeing right now. To navigate to other levels in the hierarchy, I'm going to click on this dialog box up here on the left. So let's look at LTD data. To do that, I will find Executive Vice President and Provost and click on the arrow behind that, and that's because we in OHR roll up to the SVP of Finance and Operations. I hit the wrong one, sorry. Where to University Finance and Operations. Okay, then I want Office of Human Resources, and then I will click directly on Leadership and Talent Development and click Apply. So a couple of things to note about this. You'll notice that the report name is listed in the banner up here on the left, and you'll also see the leader's internet ID is included as the org code at the end. Previously, the org code was a system-generated 5-digit number assigned by the vendor to help locate reports. We decided to use the Internet ID so it was familiar to us and had meaning. It also helps you keep track of where you're at in the hierarchy if the manager name isn't included in the report name. So in this case, I'm seeing Leadership and Talent Development with Brandon Sullivan's Internet ID because he is the director of the unit. I don't see Brandon's name in the hierarchy here. The other item to note is that we see some of Brandon's direct reports in the hierarchy. I can see that by clicking on the arrow afterward. We'll only see those people who have that are managers here and have direct reports. None of Brandon's direct reports have 5 people reporting to them or any survey results. So just know that you'll see the full reporting hierarchy here, but there may not be any data available. I'm going to walk through the other menu options now to show you how to view more detailed information. To do that, I'm going to navigate back to the overall system level for data. Let's start by looking at the engagement profile. I will select key metrics and then engagement profile, employee engagement profile. The engagement profile is based on the university's engagement model, which has 2 key metrics, commitment and dedication, and effective environment. Commitment and dedication refers to an individual's level of motivation and pride for the organization. When employees are committed and dedicated to their work, they care not only about the quality of their own work, but are also invested in the collective work of their group, college, campus, or unit, and or the university. This is a defining characteristic of employee engagement. Thus, it's one of 2 key components in the University of Minnesota's model of employee engagement. Effective environment refers to creating conditions that allow individuals to be effective in their jobs, such as removing barriers to productivity. We see this when employees thrive and continue to give their best efforts because the work environment supports them. Each quadrant here shows the percentage of people who fall into that particular category. The top bars in each quadrant represent the unit that you're looking at. The engaged quadrant includes respondents who scored higher on commitment and dedication and effective environment. Frustrated includes respondents who scored higher on commitment and dedication and lower on effective environment. Disengaged represents people who scored lower on both commitment and dedication and effective environment. And detached includes people who scored lower on commitment and dedication and higher on effective environment. In this detailed view, you'll also see the unit's 2017 results compared to the 2 previous years of the survey, then against the unit, college or campus, and the university overall. I'm not seeing those comparisons here in this example because I'm at the top of the hierarchy. We will discuss these comparators in detail later in the webinar. Now I'd like to show you some more detailed survey results. To get there, we'll navigate to Explore Results and then Key Metrics and Drivers. So the first thing, again, is to notice that the gray bar here at the top points to where you are in the system, just so you can keep track of where you've been navigating. This view should look similar to all of those of you who have received engagement data in the past. It's the same data from previous years. The key metrics here are capitalized. They are commitment and dedication and effective environment. I'll go over each of the columns now and what they represent. So we'll start with percent favorable. That shows the percentage of people who answered agree or strongly agree. Percent neutral shows the percentage of people who answered neither agree nor disagree. Percent unfavorable shows the percentage of people who answered disagree or strongly disagree. The percentages may not always total exactly 100 due to rounding to the nearest whole number. This is not an error, it's just a function of rounding the numbers, and it can result in the total for all 3 bars adding up to 99% or 101%. For example, assume 12 people responded to a question where 4 people were favorable, 4 were neutral, and 4 were unfavorable. The percent favorable would be 33%, neutral would be 33%, and unfavorable would be 33%, adding to a total of 99%. We can see an instance of this here with clear and promising direction. 72 plus 18 plus 11 equals 101. So just know that you may see that. Moving along here, distribution shows the same information in a bar chart where green is favorable, gray is neutral, and red is unfavorable. We then move on to the percent favorable difference section, which is based on the percent favorable for 2017. Remember, that's the percentage in the green bar. This shows us trend information. The first column is 2014 same unit results. A positive number means the 2017 favorable results are that many percentage points higher than in 2014. A minus sign indicates that 2017 favorable results are that many percentage points lower than in 2014. And a dash would indicate that trend information is not available. 2015 same unit results similarly compares the 2017 favorable results against the 2015 survey results. So in total, we'll see 2 years of trend data. As an example, let's look at development opportunities. The percentage favorable this year is 66%. These results are higher than the results from 2014 by 8 points, which is indicated by an 8 in the 2014 same unit results column. So in 2014, this number was 58%. 66 minus 8 equals 58. Similarly, the results for 2015 were 61%. 66 minus 5 equals 61. As you can see, the trend is going up. By knowing the result for 2017 and the percent favorable difference, you can easily calculate the percentage for the previous years. When making meaning of these changes in terms of the trend data between this year, 2017, and the last survey year, 2015, we consider a low likelihood for meaningful change to be less than 5 percentage points above or below the 2015 data. There's a medium likelihood for meaningful change between 5 and 10 percentage points above or below the 2015 data. And a high likelihood for meaningful change is typically greater than 10 percentage points above or below the 2015 data. Know that these are general guidelines only. Keep in mind the practical significance of these differences based on the valid n size, and that the directional path may be more helpful in the context of a smaller N size. We want to stress that the percentage of favorable difference is not as relevant for smaller organizations with a smaller N size. For trend data specifically, keep in mind that when you have a small group of people in your unit and 1, 2, or 3 employees change their rating compared to the previous survey, this may give you a fairly large percent change difference. Here's an example. 2 people didn't weigh in last year, but they decided to respond this year, and their responses were negative. You may have a decline of 20 or 30% from last year, but if you have an overall small group, that may be only a few people. Okay, let's continue to navigate through the portal. There's a button at the top right called Filters and Comparators that shows the column names as total college unit, total campus, and total university system. You can choose which level of comparators you'd like to view. By default, you'll view them all unless you deselect them here. The Guide button on the right provides definitions for the benchmarks. So let's talk about that now. Please note that few institutions of higher education are measuring employee engagement, and none of those doing so are comparable to the University of Minnesota system in size or complexity. So the benchmarks are against ourselves. The 2017 benchmarks are as follows. Total college unit. This is your area's scores compared to everyone who reports to the senior leader of your college or unit. This benchmark will not appear for system campuses. In the case of LTD, this would be the Office of Human Resources. Total campus. This is your area's scores compared to everyone who reports to the same senior leader on your campus. For system campuses, this comparison will be at the chancellor level. For the Twin Cities campus, this comparison will be for those whose senior leader reports to either Executive Vice President and Provost Hansen or Senior Vice President of Finance and Operations Burnett. This comparison will not be available for Twin Cities staff whose senior leader reports to President Kaler. Because LTD rolls up through the Vice President of Finance and Operations, that's what we would see. And then total university system. This identifies your area scores compared to everyone in the university system. Once you've selected the comparators that you'd like to filter on, click Save and Return to get back to the results. Above the data, you'll see a drop-down arrow where you can sort the results in different ways, by percent favorable, percent neutral, or percent unfavorable. There's also the option then to return to the default view. We can also view the results in another way, by survey question. So to do this, let's go to Explore Results, and then Question Summary. This is similar to the view that we just saw, but now we're seeing a new field called Valid N. That shows you the number of people who responded to a particular question. Respondents who may have skipped questions or answered don't know, not applicable, are not counted in the N for that question. The survey question numbers are shown along the left side. Note that you may have the option to scroll to the right to view all of the comparators and the results. 3 survey follow-up questions were added to the survey in 2014 to provide an indication for leaders about employee perceptions on whether they had participated in a feedback session around the survey results, whether they had seen action taken on survey results, and whether they felt the results would be used constructively. The reason these questions are important is the tendency for engagement to decline when employees perceive their input has been ignored or discounted. Therefore, it is important to share the data with your employees and engage them in discussion around areas of strengths to celebrate and sustain and areas of opportunity for action. It is also important to provide ongoing communication of progress around the steps taken to share results and take action. Often employees do not realize or may forget that actions taken to improve the work environment were a direct result of the feedback provided in the survey. For this reason, it's also important to provide a summary of all actions taken to support employee engagement prior to the next survey administration. Now, many people are curious about their unit's strengths and development opportunities. To see this information, let's go to Explore Results and then click on Results Sorting Tool. This is different than what we saw earlier, because we're seeing specific survey items here, whereas earlier we just saw results at the key metric and driver level. It defaults to the strengths view, but you can select different sorting options from the dropdown. Strengths are based on favorable and unfavorable scores and compared to benchmarks. Opportunities are based on favorable and unfavorable scores and are compared to benchmarks as well. Top 10 most favorable are based on favorable scores. They do not incorporate any comparisons to trend data or internal benchmarks of the unit, campus, or system. Top 10 most unfavorable are based on unfavorable scores. Again, this doesn't account for comparisons to trend or benchmarks. And top 10 neutral are based on neutral scores alone without comparison to trend or benchmarks. Let's move on and discuss comments. Data will appear here under the comments menu if there are at least 20 comments per question. That's to protect confidentiality. This means that if there are less than 20 comments from the team whose data you are viewing, no comments will show. Comments that are suppressed in this way for smaller groups will roll up to the level in the organization where the minimum of 20 comments is reached. So they can be captured in the overall data. In addition, the comments have been scrubbed by the vendor to eliminate names of people and departments or units, as well as titles. For most of you, the functionality around comments isn't going to be important because comments won't be available to you. However, if you do have comments, you can learn about the full data portal functionality in our printable guide on ee.ltd.umn.edu, and it's titled Comments. Now I'll show you how to export all other data points so that you can save the data and share it with others. So we'll go to the top and click on Export. There are many options when it comes to exporting your data. So rather than going through all of the details here, please refer to the printable guide about exporting on ee.ltd.umn.edu. Again, I'll show you that when we get to that site. I will just point out a few things for you here. Note that there are 3 formats for exporting your data: Excel, PowerPoint, and PDF. PDF is the default format because that export is the most readable. The other 2 formats allow for more editing options. Also know that there are limits to the amount of data that you can export. You can export 20 full reports. You have unlimited access for single-page reports. And knowing that there are limits, we do encourage you to save the data that you export. The last note that I have about exporting is that if you have comments, they will not be exported in the full report option. You have to export them via the comment menu that we looked at a minute ago. We've talked about some of the menu options, so now I'll go over the rest of them for you here. Print prints out the page that you're on, and it looks like you're printing a web page. I don't think it's a great format, so I would recommend exporting the data and printing it from that exported file. Log off does just what it says, logs you out of the system. Preferences allows you to change your password, so you may not need this option. Re-enter report clears all filters and refreshes everything in the current Navigator site, bringing you back to the highest level of the hierarchy to which you have access. Report list allows you to select different hierarchies if you have different hierarchies to view. So if you click that, it'll bring you back to that list of hierarchies that we saw at the beginning where you can choose a different one. And help links to the LTD website that we've talked about, ee.ltd.umn.edu. Okay, now that we've learned about navigating through the online data portal, let's talk about interpreting the data available to you. There are many resources available to you on ee.ltd.umn.edu under Interpreting Survey Results tab. So let's go there now. So here I am at ee.ltd.umn.edu, and I'm going to click Interpreting Survey Results. We've created a guide called Interpreting Survey Results to help you do just that. It's meant to accommodate the video above here on the page. We're not going to show you that video today, but please know that it's there and it can be a helpful guide to interpreting your survey data. Today we're going to review all of the information from that video. If you click View Printable Guide, it will appear in PDF format, and you'll want to download it so that you can enter your specific data and save it. I have one that I've started here today to fill out for the webinar. It looks like this. We created this guide especially for leaders who may be receiving employee engagement survey data for the first time. It's intended to walk you through the specific data points and prepare you to share the data with your work group and discuss the results to inform action planning. We recommend both celebrating and sustaining strengths, as well as deciding on 1 to 3 areas for action that are most important to supporting your work priorities. For the purposes of this exercise, I have completed the guide with sample data, and I will walk you through each section with myself in mind as if I were the leader of an employee engagement team of 9 direct reports. Both my role and the data I describe are a sample for how you may use this guide. In this context, I haven't completed every field on the form, as the objective for today's webinar is to give you an idea of how the guide may be helpful to you. So with that in mind, let's walk through the form. To begin, it's important to consider your response rate. This can be found on the respondent section of the data portal. You'll see that we've highlighted the navigation for you on the guide. So for the participation rate, you'd see that in step 1, number 1. Remember that faculty and staff receive different versions of the survey, so they will always be counted separately. Employees who are benefits eligible and whose date of hire was active in the HRMS system by September 6, 2017, were invited to complete the survey. The response rate is important in terms of determining whether the responses you gathered are representative of your overall staff or faculty group. As you can see, all 9 of my direct reports responded to the survey. Earlier, we examined the engagement profile, and this is the broadest indicator of engagement for your area. You can see that I filled in the quadrants with my team's data. You can find your data on the dashboard, and that's called out here for you on the guide. Research shows that leaders have the most success by focusing on one area of the 4 quadrants, which is the frustrated quadrant. This area has one measure of engagement working well for them, which is commitment and dedication. However, the work environment is not working as effectively as it could for them. These employees are well placed to move into the engaged camp. Although there may be a tendency to focus on the disengaged quadrant, this is unlikely to yield positive results, and there will always be some people who are in this space. In fact, research shows that even in some of the highest performing organizations in the world, about 20 to 25% of employees are in that disengaged quadrant. It is often easier to have an impact on work environment issues than it is to address personal commitment and dedication. Therefore, focusing on the frustrated quadrant can often present the greatest opportunity. Frustrated employees typically do one of 3 things. They find innovative ways around environmental barriers and they become engaged. They get tired of challenging environmental barriers and they leave the organization, or they lower their expectations and they become disengaged. Paying attention to environmental factors is something that usually lies within a unit's span of control and can pay big dividends in engaging employees. As you can see, about 1/5 of my team is feeling frustrated, so addressing some aspect of the work environment may be important to my team. Now let's look at the absolute scores for the key metrics drivers and specific survey items. Most often, scores in the 70% favorable range or above are considered a strength. Scores of less than 60% favorable may be an indication that more information is necessary. Unfavorable scores of greater than 20% indicate that action may be needed. A large percentage of neutral responses means that faculty and staff neither agree nor disagree with a statement. They may have mixed experiences with the topic the question asks about, or are awaiting further information to help them decide whether they agree or disagree. Neutral responses higher than 20% should be viewed as an opportunity to gather more information to support the possibility of moving the neutral response in the favorable direction. When you have a small group of people in your unit, 10 or less, you need to consider the practical significance of the percentage of favorable differences. When you see large percentages in small units, it's important to consider the actual number of employees within those ranges, since 1 or 2 employee responses could have a large impact in the overall distribution. Survey data is organized into strengths and opportunities, as we noted earlier. This can be helpful as another lens to help identify what is working well and what could be improved upon. Survey items associated with each of the two key metrics, commitment and dedication and effective environment, will not be listed in the strengths section as they are less actionable than the items associated with each metric's 5 drivers. Survey follow-up items can be listed here as they are an ongoing measure of data shared and action taken that is perceived as a constructive use of employee feedback. Again, both strengths and opportunities are not simply the top and bottom rated survey items. There's more complexity to how they're calculated, which includes an algorithm used by Korn Ferry Hay Group to include percent favorable and unfavorable and a comparison to the benchmarks. I pulled a couple of my strengths for my team and entered them into the guide. Again, the guide shows you where you can find this information in the system. Remember, we don't want to forget about what people have identified as our strengths because it's important to celebrate and sustain them versus take them for granted. They can also often be leveraged to support working on areas of opportunity. I've identified 2 of my strengths that I believe can be leveraged to support our work overall and to help address our opportunities. I did the same thing for the opportunities section. Feel free to fill in as much detail as is helpful on the guide. And we've only provided room for 3 opportunities because we recommend that you focus on 1 to 3 items for taking action. If an item is an opportunity, it doesn't mean that action planning efforts must be focused here. This is just another source of information on the whole picture of engagement for your work area. I've identified 2 areas of opportunity that I think are most integral to our work priorities, but I will be asking my group for input on these before deciding to take action. If you prefer to identify areas of strength or opportunity based only on the percent of favorable or unfavorable responses to the specific survey items, then the following sections may be more helpful to you. Remember, the top 10 most favorable and top 10 most unfavorable items are not compared against the benchmarks, so you may see some differences between strengths and the top 10 most favorable items. I've listed one here that one item here, and you are the one who gets to determine which areas that you want to focus on. I've identified a clearly favorable item here that wasn't on my list of strengths that I think will be important to sustain and leverage in our planning. Again, I just entered a couple of items in the top 10 most unfavorable section here. You'll be selecting just 1 to 3 of those items here to focus on for your action planning. Similar to my top 10 most favorable, I've identified an item in the top 10 unfavorable list that wasn't on my list of opportunities that I think will be important to discuss with my team because it also has several neutral responses. This is a theme that I've noted because I want to be sure to address the possible barriers in the work environment, given that a portion of my team are frustrated, as noted earlier. As I mentioned earlier, items with neutral scores of higher than 20% could be options to choose for action planning, as there were a lot of people indicating they were unsure about that item. I've identified equitable distribution of workload as an item in this section because there's an equal number of neutral and unfavorable responses. This means that more than half of the team didn't respond favorably about that equitable distribution of workload, so it's going to be important to discuss. Seeing the changes of the same data collected over a period of 3 years, 2014, 2015, and 2017, will help you identify overall trends. We've identified some items here that may impact trend. They are changes in leadership or reorganization in your unit. Keep in mind that this may make trend data less relevant for you if too much has changed to make year-to-year comparisons meaningful. Therefore, we've marked this section as optional. In my case, I didn't receive data for the last survey because I did not have the required 10 direct reports to get survey data last time. Therefore, I do not have trend data. Moving along, here's a reminder of the benchmarks and their definitions. We weren't seeing these benchmarks earlier today because we were looking at the overall staff level. However, thinking about my sample data as part of leadership and talent development, I would see Office of Human Resources for total college and unit. I would see University Finance and Operations for the total campus, and then I'd see overall staff results for the total university system. As a reminder, because few institutions of higher education are measuring employee engagement similar to how we are, our benchmarks are against ourselves. Again, you get to decide the relevance of these data points regarding the areas of action that are most relevant for your groups and work priorities. Therefore, we've marked this section as optional. In looking at the comments section, remember most of you don't have comments because they tend to be at a higher level with that 20 comment threshold. If you do have comments, they're meant to provide context to your results and give you ideas for follow-up discussions with your group. It's important to recognize that the number of comments offered are typically significantly less than the overall amount of quantitative data available. So they are not meant to stand on their own to inform action. Now that we've looked at the data through the 3 recommended lenses, it's important to take a step back and reflect prior to sharing the data with your faculty or staff and engaging them in discussions. First, it's important to identify your personal why in terms of how employee engagement can help you as a leader. Employee engagement can sometimes feel like it's one more thing to do in a long list of priorities, and as a result, it can get lost in the shuffle. Many leaders have found that people won't typically buy into something if they don't understand the why behind it. So what is your why for employee engagement? Is it because it's the right thing to do? Or you know that when people are engaged or connected to their work, they produce better outcomes? Or maybe it's because engaged employees are more resilient in a changing environment? Or simply because it's a pleasant working environment when people are engaged? Could your department or unit have a greater impact if engagement continues to increase? Could you better achieve your most important goals if employee engagement actions were aligned to this work? You can think about this as a way to explain the importance of using employee engagement data to further your department or unit's strategic direction. I made a note here about why employee engagement is important to me as a leader. It's also important to remember that these data are a snapshot in time. An opportunity to hear employee feedback helps leaders identify where things are going well and where improvements can be made in the work environment to support the work of committed and dedicated employees and reduce frustration, which can often lead to turnover or disengagement. Therefore, it's important to understand the context of your employee engagement data because while it is a snapshot in time, it's also closely tied to everything that's going on in the work environment. Employee engagement can be viewed through the lens of strategic objectives, change initiatives, organizational changes, and the unique culture of your department or unit. The following questions may be helpful to explore to remind you of the context in which your staff and faculty responded to the survey items. You can see some of my responses about the context of my sample work group. What accomplishments do you feel most proud of in this last year? How would your staff and faculty answer this question? What are your key objectives, events, and initiatives for the next year? What changes have occurred recently? For example, turnover of staff, shift in priorities, resource allocation, organizational restructuring, new leaders on board, etc. What challenges do you currently face? What other data or information do you have about your organization that is useful for providing context? To help guide the discussions in sharing your data and determining action, reflect on how your data is informed by the work environment context, as well as how your intentions around employee engagement can be communicated. To do so, it may be helpful to consider the following questions with both in mind. You can see my responses to how I'm pulling together my key points to prepare for a conversation with my team. What are 1 to 3 areas of strength that you should celebrate, leverage, and sustain? What are 1 to 3 areas of opportunity that are within your control to act on? What questions do you have, and who can assist you? What steps will you take to share your data, and what are your key talking points? So that brings us to the end of the data interpretation guide. Remember that you can find this guide on the interpreting survey results of ee.ltd.umn.edu. Survey results are an important diagnostic tool, but they're only one input necessary to fully understand faculty and staff opinions. To maximize survey effectiveness, discussion and action planning must be conducted. So for this section, we're going to take a look at the supervisory development module on engagement. I can get there by going back to the page that I was on. I can click the Home menu, and then over on the right, we have a link to the Supervisory Development course. It brings me right to Module 5, which is on employee engagement. And I'll click the Start button so that I can see more information here. Now we're seeing an overview of employee engagement, some of what we've already discussed today. I'm going to go to the discussion section in the module since that's where we're at in the engagement cycle of input, discussion, and action. For most of us, feedback is not always easily received, and the idea for needed change can also be difficult, even for experienced leaders. Leaders can unintentionally derail engagement by letting their own reactions to the data lead them to avoid taking action or act negatively. Therefore, leaders should be aware of their own reaction to the data before sharing results with the direct reports and facilitating discussion. It's very normal for leaders to experience a range of reactions to the data, including shock, anger, resistance, and acceptance. Once a leader feels ready to share and discuss the data, it is important to remember that the goal of discussion is to discover your faculty and staff's thoughts about the following questions rather than problem solve. Which issues are the most important to address given our goals and priorities? Which issues will get in our way if we don't address them? Which issues are not a high priority, even if they could use improvement? And don't forget about your strengths. Which areas are most important to celebrate and sustain? Having a conversation about the survey data will help you to understand why faculty and staff feel the way that they do. The real value in engagement begins with the discussion with employees. Therefore, sharing and discussing the results with faculty and staff is an important first step. It's important to keep in mind that typically the best approach is to be honest and straightforward. All managers have strengths and opportunities in their area, and it's important to not get defensive or explain away unfavorable results. You should present a balanced picture based on your own review of the data and then ask any questions that will help clarify reasons for the ratings. For leaders that have teams between 5 to 10 people and are getting data for the first time, it's important to resist the natural tendency to think about how individuals on your team may have responded to a particular item. In fact, your employees may be worrying that you're doing so and that your conclusions could negatively impact them. Given this, it's very important that you frame the conversations about your survey data as about the total work group and that any issues that impact just a few members of the team can be addressed one-on-one. There are more resources here to help with leading discussions about your survey data, including printable guides that offer self-reflection questions for leaders and discussion questions for staff and faculty organized by survey drivers. So be sure to review them in case they may be helpful to you after the webinar. Once the survey results have been discussed, a few small, simple actions can have a large impact. Action involves creating and implementing a plan to address the areas identified as most critical to advance the unit's goals and priorities. In this context, taking action is not more work because it's work that already needs to get done. There are 5 principles of action planning that can help support a leader's success. They're listed for you on the page here. Gain a deeper understanding of the issues before moving on to action. This is best achieved during the discussion step of the employee engagement cycle. Concentrate on 1 to 3 issues that can be executed exceptionally well. Focus on issues within your control and spend time on those areas where you can have the most impact. Be specific and clear in action plan. The most effective action plans are linked to business objectives, limited to a manageable number of action priorities, 1 to 3, focused on action areas where you have some control and therefore can have an impact, and are clear about who will do the work and how progress will be communicated. I skipped one. Involve faculty and staff in your solution where appropriate. Faculty and staff can help you understand the context for the input as well as provide appropriate solutions and be part of the implementation process. And then provide regular updates on progress. When important work is done as a result of faculty and staff input, they may not realize that these actions were based on their informal feedback and/or survey data. To avoid the perception that leaders did not take action, be certain to let faculty and staff know when actions were taken based on their informal feedback and/or survey data. Below, you'll see a table that maps specific engagement drivers to relevant tools and resources for action. If you'd like to see more ideas for action and more survey-specific resources, check out the Take Action section of the Navigating Your Report Data site. That's at the top, and it's also linked right here on the side. So I'm going to click there. That brings me to the Take Action site. Again, here's the link on the menu that could also bring me there. There are two key resources to help with your action planning. The first resource is the Action Library. This provides suggested actions by survey driver. The second is Create an Action Plan, which is a template designed for you to document your action plans. We'll start by clicking on View Action Library. This provides ideas and resources for taking action to address areas for improvement that support your strategic priorities. They're organized by each survey driver. I'll click on a driver so that you can see these options. So I click on it and expand it, and it shows me several different suggested action items. Note that some of these options will fit specific survey items within a given driver better than others. You can also feel free to edit them to best fit your purposes. They're intended as a starting point only. While the Action Library provides you with suggested action steps, the action plan is where you're able to start putting your plan together. So let's take a look at the action planning template. I could either get there on that previous page, or if I scroll to the bottom, there's this link that says log in and create an action plan. When I click on it, it is going to ask you to authenticate. It didn't ask me to do that here because I was already authenticated into the system, but it may ask you to authenticate, just know that. Please know that we are not accessing or tracking the plans that you create. We're just asking you to authenticate so that your action plan can be emailed to you. Also, don't worry if you see a security warning when you're trying to access the template. Our educational technologists are working to prevent this from happening, but for now you can just go to the advanced settings and proceed to the site. To begin, you'll select Sustain a Strength or Address an Opportunity. Each plan you create will be geared toward one of these areas, so you may decide to create more than one plan. Within this template, you can only access the Action Library via the Opportunities section. So I'm going to choose that option here. And then you'll choose a survey version. I'll choose staff since that's what we've been working on today. It then asks you to select a survey driver. So I'll pick one here. And at that point, you then choose an item to focus on. Then you'd click Next Page. All right, now here, there are several fields for you that can help you fill out your action plan. The first field is where I can enter a selected action. Notice that there's a link here to the Action Library so that you can click to it and access it and see all of those different drivers and the suggested actions there. It opens it into a new tab, and you can just copy and paste them into your template here. And then you can also choose to edit the item at that time. The next field asks about advancing your strategic priorities. Then you're asked to specify start and end dates, the support that you'll need, success measurements, etc. This form is only going to be seen by you, so use it in whatever way it'll be most helpful. None of these fields require a response. They're just offered as potentially helpful variables to consider when making an action plan. And then notice at the bottom, I have the option to select another action step. By doing this, I can tailor the plan to address each of the items that I identified earlier on that interpreting data guide. The other option then would be to submit your action plan, and this triggers an email to send you what you've just entered. Please note that I'm just introducing you to this action planning section of the site. There's clearly a lot of information here to explore and determine what's relevant for you, so we do recommend that you do that after the webinar. Okay. Here we are. We went through a lot of information fairly quickly. So for next steps, please go ahead and explore the ee.ltd.umn.edu site, which has step-by-step guides, webinar recordings, including this one, questions and answers, etc. We suggest that you fill out the Interpreting Your Survey Results Guide, as it's a good starting point to try to understand your data and preparing for further discussion and action. Because this webinar was designed for a very broad audience, please remember that we'll be conducting employee engagement labs. That's your chance to talk with an LTD consultant about interpreting, sharing, discussing, and acting on your data. We currently have 3 engagement labs scheduled, though there will be more. They're scheduled for March 7, 12, and 13 and will take place around lunchtime. We will also be hosting a WebEx lab session for the Rochester, Morris, Duluth, and Crookston campuses. Look for more information about the engagement labs in the coming weeks. We'll have information about them on these websites listed here on this slide as well. Okay, now we have time for questions. So for those of you who've been submitting questions here, we're going to take a look at them and try to answer them for you now. Otherwise, please do go ahead and use that Q&A field on the right of your screen to submit any questions that you may have. There's a question about, can you clarify the question on the survey? Given your choice, how long would you work at the U of M? I believe it's how many years do you plan to continue working at the University of Minnesota? And what would constitute a favorable or unfavorable response? So for that question, yes, it's done differently than all of the other questions on the survey. For that one, 5 years or more or until retirement is considered a favorable response. Between 3 to 5 years is a neutral response, and then less than 2 years is an unfavorable response. So I hope that helps.
We have another question. When will the engagement survey results be available to faculty and staff? And all supervisors, managers that were eligible to get a report have received their data already. They should have gotten an email from Korn Ferry Hay. And if you did not receive that, you want to maybe check your all mail or junk mail, just in case something happened there that it didn't get into your inbox. And if you have any other questions on that, send us an email directly and we'll get to the bottom of it. So
there's a question about, do your results stay with your unit or do they go to the unit that you report up to? And the latter is the case. So all results will roll up to your next level manager in the system. They are included in their indirect hierarchy.
We've got another question here. How much time shall I plan to do follow-up work reading about the survey? So without understanding the details around that question, I think what our suggestion would be as a leader that you want to kind of get a good handle on your data and to be able to kind of think about your context, to kind of explore maybe what your priorities are, what you're trying to accomplish, and then think about what some of the underlying issues might be before you start discussing. So I would advise a leader to kind of put some time into the front end of that and stay curious and try not to jump to assumptions. I think the guide that Marissa just went through kind of guides you through some of those key questions. And I think if after doing that, you'd probably be pretty prepared to kind of go to the next step where you're asking staff and faculty more details about what their concerns might be. So again, remaining, thinking through it, but trying not to jump to conclusions or have all the solutions is really important here, because what you want to create is a feedback loop so that you can have an effective discussion. And we find that leaders kind of like to have thought about it a little bit ahead of time.
We have a question about, is that action plan template available as a PDF? Absolutely, yes. That is, let me go back to our site here on ee.ltd.umn.edu.
I think it's the template, not the guide.
Oh, sorry, if I go to take action, here, create an action plan. So this link right here, log down an action plan. Sorry, it's not a PDF. I was wrong. I was thinking of the guide. The action plan is not a PDF. It's just in here, and then it emails you your results so that you have that available. There's a question about exporting limitations. It doesn't matter which format you're choosing, whether it's PDF, Excel, or PowerPoint, you are allowed 20 full report exports total. And that's of the full reports, 20. And then you can do any single page export, those are unlimited. So you can do that as well. That's why we really do recommend that when you're exporting, you save that data so that you don't have to waste an export. But if somebody runs into a problem where they're unable to export, please send an email to EE2 and we'll help you out with that.
So another question here, leader is saying, while I have received the engagement survey results as a division chair, when do my faculty and staff receive the results? And the answer to that is they will receive the results when you share it with them. So they were not eligible for a report, only you were. And so the only way they will see that data is if you present that to them. So that's why we're giving you the tools so that can help you get ready for that discussion.
There's a question about comments. Someone who doesn't have enough direct reports to get a comment report, and they're wondering what happens to those comments. The answer is that they do roll up to your next level, the next level in the hierarchy, so your manager. They're included in their comment report, or if they don't have enough comments either, it rolls up to the manager above them. Okay, well, I think that we're at 1 o'clock. So we said we'd have the webinar for an hour, and we're going to try to keep our word on that. If you do have other questions, please send an email to ee2@umn.edu. And I know that you're just starting to digest this data, so please remember that those labs are going to be available. Those will be a great opportunity for you to come in and ask your questions one-on-one and get some answers or some direction on the next steps to take as well. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great afternoon.